The phone rang at 3:27 in the morning, piercing through the silence of Callista's penthouse overlooking Central Park. She reached across the Egyptian cotton sheets, expecting work emergency calls that came with her position as creative director at one of Manhattan's most prestigious advertising agencies. "Hello, Mrs. Beaumont," a sultry voice purred through the speaker. "I thought you should know your husband is here with me right now." Callista's blood turned to ice. The woman continued with cruel satisfaction. "He's been coming to my apartment every Tuesday and Friday for the past 8 months. Tonight he told me he's finally ready to leave you." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. 8 months. Every late meeting, every business trip, every gentle kiss on her forehead as he whispered about working late. All lies. "Adrian says you're nothing but a workaholic who neglects him," the mistress continued, her voice dripping with malice. "He says I make him feel alive again." But then something unexpected happened. The woman's voice cracked. "Wait, what are you doing? Adrian, why are you laughing? What do you mean, both of them? What photos on your phone?" A man's laughter echoed in the background, cold, calculating laughter that made Callista's spine crawl. "Oh my God," the woman whispered, and the line went dead. Callista stared at her phone, heart hammering. The mistress had called to gloat, but something had gone terribly wrong on the other end. What had Adrian shown her? What photos? And why was he laughing like that? She was about to discover that betrayal had layers she'd never imagined. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Callista's corner office on Madison Avenue, casting geometric shadows across her mahogany desk. Manhattan stretched below her like a living canvas of ambition and dreams, the familiar symphony of traffic and distant construction creating the soundtrack of success she'd grown to love over 15 years in the city. Callista Moreau had built her reputation on understanding human psychology, crafting campaigns that touched the deepest desires and fears of consumers. Her corner office at Sterling & Associates was a testament to her success. Walls lined with international advertising awards, client testimonials that spoke of her brilliance, and a team of 12 creatives who respected her vision and fought to work under her direction. At 34, she was the youngest creative director the agency had ever promoted, and her campaigns had generated over $50 million in revenue for their clients in the past year alone. But this morning, the woman who could read any audience sat frozen, replaying that haunting phone call. The mistress's voice had shifted from cruel triumph to genuine terror in seconds. What had Adrian shown her that made her gasp and hang up? The uncertainty gnawed at her like a physical pain, making it impossible to concentrate on the presentation materials spread across her desk. Her assistant knocked softly at the glass door. "Mrs. Beaumont, your 9 o'clock is here." The Morrison Hotel's campaign team. Callista forced herself into her professional persona, the one that had served her so well in boardrooms and client presentations. "Send them in, Patricia." The campaign presentation blurred past in a haze of strategic discussions and creative concepts. She smiled at appropriate moments, nodded thoughtfully at client concerns, approved creative directions that her team had developed, but her mind kept circling back to that laughter. Cold, predatory laughter that seemed to echo from some dark place she'd never suspected existed in her husband. She'd heard Adrian laugh like that only once before, she realized with growing unease. 2 years ago, when his primary business rival had lost everything in a corruption scandal that mysteriously benefited Adrian's construction company. At the time, she'd attributed his satisfaction to normal competitive feelings. Now, that memory took on a sinister new meaning. The Morrison team left satisfied with their campaign direction, but Callista found herself staring out at Central Park, watching couples stroll along the paths below. How many of those relationships were built on lies? How many of those women walking hand in hand with their partners had no idea they were living with strangers? During her lunch break, she found herself walking through the park itself, seeking clarity among the autumn trees that blazed with red and gold. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and she pulled her designer coat closer as she tried to make sense of the fragments of conversation she'd overheard. The mistress had mentioned photos, multiple women, something that had shocked even her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian, "Working late tonight on the Henderson project. Don't wait up. Love you." Another Tuesday. Another lie, she now knew. The Henderson project, she'd helped him celebrate landing that contract 6 months ago, had even suggested marketing strategies over dinner. Now she wondered if Mrs. Henderson was another conquest rather than a client. That evening, as Manhattan's lights twinkled like earthbound stars beyond her penthouse windows, Callista made a decision that would change everything. Instead of her usual routine of reviewing campaigns with a glass of wine while waiting for Adrian's return, she opened his laptop. Her hands trembled as she navigated through his files, not knowing what she'd find, but certain she needed to see. What she discovered made her stomach drop to the floor and her entire worldview shatter like glass. Folder after folder of photos filled his computer's memory. Not just of one mistress, but dozens of women. Images taken in hotel rooms, vacation spots, business conference suites, even what appeared to be client meetings. Each folder was meticulously labeled with names and dates, organized like trophies in a hunter's collection. Some folders contained hundreds of photos spanning months or even years, but it wasn't just infidelity. The deeper she dug, the more calculated the deception became. Screenshots of bank accounts, copies of divorce papers from his previous marriage, financial documents showing how he'd systematically destroyed his ex-wife's credit rating and business partnerships. There were even photos of women crying, apparently unaware they were being photographed in their most vulnerable moments, their pain captured like specimens in a collection. Her blood turned to ice when she found the folder labeled Callista. Inside were photos of her sleeping, showering, dressing for work, all taken without her knowledge over what appeared to be months. Copies of her bank statements, her business contacts, even private emails from her work account that he somehow had access to. Documents outlining her assets, her client relationships, her business partnerships, her vulnerabilities, even transcripts of private conversations she'd had with friends and colleagues. At the bottom of the folder was a video file titled The Plan. With shaking fingers, she clicked play, and Adrian's voice filled her home office, speaking to someone off-camera in what appeared to be a restaurant or bar. She's worth $12 million between her business assets, investment portfolio, and the apartment. Adrian's voice was clinical, detached, discussing her like a business acquisition. The divorce will be swift once I have the right ammunition. These photos of her neglecting our marriage will help establish her as an absent spouse. Plus, I've documented every late night at the office, every business trip, every time she chose work over our relationship. Her own success will be used against her in court. The voice responding made her knees buckle. It was his lawyer, but also his brother Marcus, the man she'd trusted, who'd been a frequent dinner guest at their home, who'd given her advice about expanding her business, who'd even helped her negotiate her current employment contract. "What about the other women?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting this was routine business discussion. Adrian's laugh, that same cold sound from the phone call, filled the room. They serve multiple purposes. Some are genuine attractions, others are strategic connections for business deals. A few are just practice runs. You have to understand women's psychology to destroy them effectively. Each one teaches you something new about manipulation techniques. The video was time-stamped 6 months ago. 6 months of planning her destruction while kissing her goodnight, while making love to her, while discussing their future together. The video ended, but Callista remained frozen in her chair as Manhattan glittered indifferently beyond her windows. This wasn't just betrayal. It was psychological warfare conducted by someone she'd shared her bed, her dreams, her deepest fears and aspirations with for 3 years. Her phone buzzed with another text from Adrian. "Actually heading home now. Can't wait to see my beautiful wife." For the first time since that devastating phone call 20 hours earlier, Callista smiled. But it wasn't the warm, trusting smile Adrian knew. It was the smile she wore in boardrooms when she was about to destroy a competitor's campaign with superior strategy and flawless execution. Adrian thought he understood women's psychology. He was about to learn he'd chosen the wrong woman to study because he'd picked someone whose entire career was built on understanding human nature and crafting campaigns that could change minds and hearts. The hunt was about to begin, and the predator was about to discover he'd become the prey. The next morning dawned grey and drizzling over Manhattan, but Callista woke before her alarm with crystalline clarity she hadn't experienced in months. She lay perfectly still beside Adrian, studying his sleeping face in the pale morning light filtering through their bedroom curtains. His features looked peaceful, almost innocent, and she marveled at how completely she'd been deceived by this carefully constructed facade. 3 years of marriage, and she'd never seen the predator beneath the charming exterior. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, noting how even in sleep he maintained that aura of confidence that had first attracted her. Now she understood it wasn't confidence, it was the certainty of a hunter who believed his prey was completely unaware of the trap. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, pulling her close with practiced affection that now felt like poison against her skin. "Sorry about last night. The Henderson project is becoming a complete nightmare, but I think we're finally making progress." The Henderson project. She now knew Mrs. Henderson had been one of his strategic connections, probably another married woman being systematically seduced while her husband remained oblivious. "Of course, darling," Callista replied softly, matching his tone with an acting performance that would have impressed Broadway directors. "Your work is so important to both of us." He kissed her forehead with the same gentle gesture that had once made her feel cherished, and she fought every instinct that screamed to pull away. Instead, she leaned into the kiss, making mental notes about his behavior patterns, his unconscious tells, his vulnerabilities. If Adrian wanted to play psychological games, she'd show him what a true strategic mind could accomplish when properly motivated. At the office, Callista's assistant Patricia noticed the change immediately, though she couldn't pinpoint what was different. "Mrs. Beaumont, you seem more focused today. More intense." Focused was an understatement. Callista had entered a state of crystalline clarity she'd only experienced during her most challenging campaigns, when million-dollar accounts hung in the balance and every decision mattered. She spent her lunch break not eating, but visiting a private investigator recommended by her corporate lawyer. "I need comprehensive background research," she told Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman whose office overlooked Bryant Park. "Financial records, communication histories, property holdings, business dealings, personal relationships, legal proceedings, everything spanning the last 15 years. Detective Chen reviewed Callista's initial notes with professional detachment. "This is quite comprehensive, Mrs. Beaumont. Are you certain you want to pursue this course? Sometimes ignorance is genuinely less painful than truth, especially in marriage cases." "Ignorance is what allowed me to become a target," Callista replied firmly. "Truth is what will protect me and potentially other women from experiencing the same thing." The next several days blurred into a careful performance that required every ounce of her professional acting skills. Callista played the role of loving, oblivious wife while systematically gathering evidence and building her case. She installed discreet recording software on their shared devices, documented every late night and suspicious phone call, photographed important documents, and began constructing her own strategic folder. But the psychological toll was devastating in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each kiss felt like betrayal, every "I love you" like a knife twist to her heart. She found herself questioning everything, not just their marriage, but her own judgment, her ability to read people, her worth as a woman and as a professional. How could someone who built her career on understanding human psychology have been so thoroughly deceived? The worst moment came on Friday evening when Adrian returned from another supposed business meeting, his clothing carrying the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume, and his phone buzzing with text messages he quickly silenced. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, settling beside her on their Italian leather sofa with a glass of wine, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. "Productive," she answered truthfully. She'd spent the afternoon reviewing Detective Chen's preliminary findings, confirmation of 4 current mistresses, evidence of financial manipulation dating back years, and disturbing patterns with his previous relationships that painted a picture of systematic predatory behavior. "I love how dedicated you are to your work," Adrian continued, stroking her hair with fingers that had touched other women hours before. "It's one of the things that first attracted me to you. Your independence, your drive, your passion for what you do." The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly crafted, that she might have missed it before this week. He was simultaneously praising her professional dedication while implying it was a character flaw that damaged their marriage, laying psychological groundwork for future accusations of neglect and emotional abandonment. "You're so understanding about my career demands," she murmured, and felt another piece of her soul die at the necessity of the lie. That weekend, Adrian suggested a romantic getaway to their house in the Hamptons. "We never spend quality time together anymore," he said with perfect concern, his handsome face arranged in an expression of loving worry. "I feel like we're drifting apart, and I don't want to lose what we have." The irony was staggering. The man who'd spent 8 months systematically cheating, planning her financial destruction, and photographing her without consent was now positioning himself as the victim of her supposed emotional distance. At the Hampton house, a property she'd helped purchase with her own investment funds, Callista sat on the deck overlooking the Atlantic, while Adrian grilled steaks, playing the perfect husband for their neighbor's benefit. The ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and she found herself thinking about drowning, not literal drowning, but the way she'd been slowly suffocating in a marriage built entirely on lies. Her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Detective Chen. "Critical findings. Call when you're completely alone." That night, while Adrian slept beside her after making love with the same passionate intensity that had convinced her of his devotion for 3 years, Callista crept to the bathroom and returned Chen's call in whispers. "I've uncovered something deeply disturbing," Chen began without preamble, her voice grim. "Your husband's pattern of behavior goes back much further than we initially thought. I found records of 3 previous marriages, not just the one you knew about. Each marriage ended with the wife financially devastated and psychologically destroyed." Callista gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white in the bathroom's dim lighting. 3 marriages? The first wife, Margaret, lost her successful bakery business in the divorce settlement and now works as a cashier at a grocery store, living in a studio apartment in Queens. The second, Jennifer, had to declare bankruptcy after the divorce and moved back with her elderly parents in Ohio. The third, Rebecca, the one you knew about, lost custody of her 2 children and hasn't been allowed to see them in over 2 years. The bathroom walls felt like they were closing in around her. This wasn't just infidelity or even garden variety financial abuse. It was a predatory pattern spanning over a decade of systematically targeting and destroying successful women. "There's more," Chen continued ominously. "Based on recent financial moves and legal consultations, I believe you're intended to be his final target. Your assets would set him up for permanent retirement. But Mrs. Beaumont, I think he's accelerating his timeline significantly. Some of his recent actions suggest he's planning to initiate divorce proceedings within the next 2 to 3 weeks." After hanging up, Callista stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The successful woman looking back at her, the creative director who'd built campaigns that changed consumer behavior, the strategic mind who'd never lost a major account, the fierce professional who'd climbed to the top of a competitive industry, felt like a stranger she was meeting for the first time. How had she become prey? When had she stopped being the hunter? But as she studied her own eyes in the mirror, something fundamental shifted. The vulnerability hardened into determination. The confusion crystallized into purpose. The fear transformed into fury. Adrian had chosen the wrong woman for his final hunt, because he'd chosen someone whose entire career was built on strategic thinking, psychological insight, and flawless execution under pressure. Callista Moreau hadn't built her reputation by being a victim. She'd built it by being a strategist who never lost when the stakes were high. And she was about to prove that predators become prey when they encounter a superior intellect with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. The war was just beginning, and she intended to win it completely. Monday morning brought the kind of autumn crispness that made Manhattan feel electric with possibility, but Callista walked into her office carrying something more powerful than seasonal energy. She carried the focused determination of someone who'd finally seen her enemy clearly. The leather portfolio in her hands contained the most important campaign strategy of her career, the complete and systematic destruction of Adrian Beaumont. "Cancel all my afternoon meetings and reschedule them for later in the week," she instructed Patricia, her voice carrying an authority that made her assistant look up sharply, "and arrange a conference call with Mitchell and Associates' top forensic accountant for this afternoon. Also, I need you to book me a private dining room at the Plaza for Wednesday evening, somewhere with excellent acoustics." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she'd worked for Callista long enough to know when her boss was orchestrating something significant. "Of course, Mrs. Beaumont. Anything else?" "Yes. Clear my calendar completely for Thursday and Friday. I'll be handling some personal business that requires my full attention." The pieces were falling into place with the precision of a military operation. Detective Chen had delivered her complete investigative report over the weekend, and the scope of Adrian's calculated cruelty was breathtaking in its thoroughness. But within that evidence lay his greatest weakness. His arrogance had made him sloppy. His digital trail was extensive, his financial manipulations were traceable, and his pattern of behavior was so consistent it would be impossible to deny in any court of law. At exactly 2:30, her phone rang with Adrian's call, arriving like clockwork with the predictability that had once seemed like devoted attention, but now revealed itself as calculated manipulation. "Darling, I need to discuss something serious with you tonight." His voice carried that tone she now recognized as manufactured concern, the same vocal inflection he probably used with all his victims when moving to the next phase of his plan. "It's about us, about our marriage, about our future together." This was it. Chen had been absolutely right. He was accelerating his timeline, probably because his lawyer had advised him to move quickly before she could become suspicious. "Of course," Callista replied, injecting exactly the right amount of worry and confusion into her voice. Is something wrong? You're making me nervous. We'll discuss everything over dinner. I've made reservations at Le Bernardin for 7 o'clock. I thought the setting would be appropriate for what we need to talk about. Le Bernardin, the restaurant where he'd proposed 3 years ago with a speech about building their future together. The psychological manipulation was masterful. He planned to destroy their marriage in the same place he'd begun it, probably hoping the location would make her more emotional, more vulnerable, less likely to think clearly about legal and financial implications. "I'll be there," she said softly, playing her role perfectly. After hanging up, Callista made 3 critical phone calls that would determine everything. The first was to Catherine Walsh, Manhattan's most ruthless divorce attorney, confirming their meeting for Thursday morning. The second was to her business manager, arranging immediate asset protection measures. The third was to Detective Chen. "Tonight's the night," she informed Chen. "Are you ready with the recording equipment we discussed?" "Everything's prepared," Chen confirmed. "The device looks like an elegant pendant. He'll never suspect it's recording everything. The audio quality will be sufficient for legal proceedings." That evening, Callista chose her outfit with the strategic precision of a general preparing for battle. A black dress that conveyed strength while maintaining femininity, jewelry that included Chen's sophisticated recording device, and the confident posture of a woman who owned her power completely. She arrived at Le Bernardin 30 minutes early, selecting their table with careful attention to acoustics and sight lines for optimal recording quality. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet conversations of Manhattan's elite, crystal glasses chiming softly against fine china, the subdued lighting creating an atmosphere of intimacy that Adrian had chosen specifically for its psychological impact. She watched couples at nearby tables, wondering how many of those relationships were genuine and how many were elaborate deceptions. Adrian arrived precisely on time, looking devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. For just a moment, she felt an echo of the attraction that had first drawn her to him 3 years ago, the way he moved through space with absolute confidence, the charming smile that had once made her heart race. But then she remembered the photos of his previous wives, the calculated cruelty in his voice on that recorded video, and her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "You look absolutely beautiful tonight," he said, kissing her cheek with practiced warmth that felt like ice against her skin. "That dress is stunning on you." They ordered wine with the careful ritual of a couple who'd shared countless dinners together, discussed the menu with the easy familiarity of 3 years of marriage, maintained the perfect facade of a loving relationship for the restaurant staff and other diners. But Callista could see the calculation behind his eyes now, the way he was building toward his moment like an actor preparing for his most important scene. The conversation flowed through safe topics, her latest campaigns, his construction projects, plans for the upcoming holidays. But she could feel the tension building in him, the way he kept glancing at his watch, checking his phone, preparing for whatever script he'd rehearsed. It came during dessert, just as she'd predicted. "Callista, I think we need to have an honest conversation about the state of our marriage," Adrian began, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine regret, but which she now recognized as carefully practiced emotion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I'm not sure this is working for either of us anymore." "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, playing her role with the skill of someone whose career depended on reading and manipulating human psychology. "You're so focused on your career, so dedicated to your work, and I feel increasingly neglected in our relationship. We barely spend time together anymore. We don't communicate the way we used to, and I feel like I'm married to a stranger who happens to share my bed." Every word was a carefully crafted weapon, designed to make her feel guilty, desperate to fix things, willing to accept blame for the marriage's failure. She watched him deploy the same tactics that had probably destroyed 3 other women, and felt a cold satisfaction knowing they wouldn't work on someone who understood exactly what he was doing. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" she asked, allowing her voice to tremble slightly. "I'm saying I think we need to seriously consider whether this marriage can be saved or if we're just prolonging something that's already dead." He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb stroking her wedding ring with what appeared to be tenderness. "I don't want either of us to waste more years in something that isn't making us happy." The performance was flawless, she had to admit. If she hadn't seen his computer files, if she didn't know about the other women, if she hadn't heard him planning her destruction, she might have been completely convinced by his apparent pain. "Is there someone else?" she asked directly, watching his reaction carefully. The question seemed to surprise him. His script probably hadn't included such direct confrontation from someone he viewed as emotionally vulnerable. "This isn't about another person," he lied smoothly, his acting skills impressive in their seamlessness. "This is about us growing apart, about fundamental incompatibilities that have become impossible to ignore. You live for your work, and I need a partner who can prioritize our relationship. What are you proposing we do about it?" "I think we should consider an amicable separation, possibly leading to divorce if we can't work things out during a trial period. I've already spoken to a lawyer about how to handle this as painlessly as possible for both of us." Of course he had, probably months ago, while lying in bed beside her and planning her destruction. Callista reached across the table and took his other hand, looking into his eyes with manufactured emotion that would have impressed method-acting coaches. "Adrian, if that's what you really think is best for both of us, then I won't fight you on it. I love you too much to keep you trapped in a marriage that makes you unhappy." The surprise on his face was genuine for the first time all evening. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected or planned for. His previous wives had probably begged, pleaded, promised to change, given him the emotional satisfaction of watching them break down completely. I have to say, I appreciate how mature you're being about this," he said carefully, probably wondering if this was some kind of trap. "I just have one request," Callista continued, her voice soft and vulnerable in a performance that deserved awards. "Can we keep this conversation between us for now? I need some time to process this emotionally before we tell anyone else or begin any legal proceedings. Maybe we could start the formal discussions next week." "Of course," Adrian agreed, probably thinking he was being generous while internally celebrating the successful completion of Phase 1 of his plan. "Take all the time you need to adjust to the idea." They finished dinner with subdued conversation about logistics and mutual respect, and Adrian even insisted on paying the check, probably viewing it as a final gesture of magnanimity toward the wife he was about to destroy. As they waited for their car outside the restaurant, he put his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that might have looked comforting to observers. "I hope you know this isn't easy for me either," he said, delivering his final lines with perfect sincerity. "You're an incredible woman, Callista. You deserve someone who can fully appreciate your dedication to your career." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that she almost admired its craftsmanship. Even in the moment of apparent separation, he was positioning himself as the victim, while simultaneously criticizing her life choices, ensuring she would blame herself rather than him for the marriage's failure. "Thank you for being so understanding and gentle about this," she replied, leaning into his embrace for what she knew would be the final time. That night, they lay in bed like strangers, both lost in their own thoughts but for completely different reasons. Adrian probably believed he'd successfully initiated the first phase of his carefully planned destruction, setting the stage for the financial and emotional devastation he'd perfected with 3 previous wives. He had no idea that Callista was lying awake, calculating the precise moment she would reveal her own strategy, one that would not only protect her assets, but potentially result in criminal charges against him. In 72 hours, she would file for divorce first, armed with evidence that would destroy him as thoroughly as he'd planned to destroy her. But tonight, she let him believe he'd won, because the sweetest revenge wasn't just surviving his trap. It was watching him walk confidently into hers. Chapter 4. Wednesday morning dawned clear and bright over Manhattan, with that particular quality of autumn light that made the city's steel and glass towers gleam like weapons. Callista felt that same metallic clarity in her soul as she walked into the offices of Morrison, Walsh and Associates, carrying a briefcase that contained 3 years of evidence and Detective Chen's devastating investigative report. Catherine Walsh's corner office overlooked Central Park from the 42nd floor, and the view seemed appropriate for someone who spent her career looking down on the destruction left by abusive spouses. Walsh herself was a legend among Manhattan's elite, a steel-haired woman whose reputation for systematically destroying manipulative husbands was whispered about in country clubs and charity galas across the city. Mrs. Beaumont, Walsh greeted her with a firm handshake and the kind of direct eye contact that suggested she'd seen every variation of marital cruelty imaginable. "I've spent the entire morning reviewing your preliminary materials and Detective Chen's report. In 23 years of practicing matrimonial law, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of systematic marital fraud I've encountered." They spent 4 hours mapping strategy with the precision of generals planning a military campaign. The evidence was overwhelming in both quantity and quality. Documented financial fraud spanning multiple years, adultery with photographic evidence and detailed timelines, psychological manipulation captured on video, and most damning of all, the recorded conversation of Adrian explicitly outlining his plan to destroy her financially and emotionally. "The beauty of this case," Walsh explained, spreading documents across her conference table like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, "is that your husband documented his own crimes. His arrogance made him sloppy, and his need to feel superior led him to record evidence that will destroy him in both civil and criminal court." Walsh's strategy was multifaceted and utterly ruthless. They would file for divorce that afternoon, before Adrian had any opportunity to hide assets or prepare counter-strategies. Simultaneously, they would request immediate restraining orders, asset freezes, and forensic accounting of all joint financial holdings. The evidence of his systematic fraud would be forwarded to both the district attorney's office and the State Bar Association, since his brother Marcus's participation made him complicit in multiple felonies. "But Callista," Walsh said, using her first name with the familiarity of someone who'd guided hundreds of women through similar battles, "are you prepared for how ugly this will become? Men like your husband don't surrender quietly when their patterns are exposed. He'll try to destroy your reputation, your business relationships, possibly even your physical safety. He's been waging psychological warfare against me for 3 years, Callista replied, her voice steady as granite. The difference is that now I know we're at war, and I'm fighting back with better weapons and superior strategy. At exactly 4:30 that afternoon, while Adrian was attending what he believed was a routine business meeting with his lawyer brother Marcus, court officers served him with comprehensive divorce papers at his construction company's headquarters. The papers included detailed evidence of adultery, systematic financial fraud, and formal requests for full asset protection pending investigation. Callista was in her office reviewing campaign proposals when her phone began exploding with increasingly frantic calls. She let each one go to voicemail, savoring the progression from confusion to anger to desperation in Adrian's voice, as he realized the scope of what was happening to him. "Callista, what the hell is this? Call me back immediately. We need to discuss this misunderstanding. Pick up your goddamn phone. We had an agreement to handle this amicably. You're making a huge mistake. You have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm pushed this far." The final message was different, delivered in the cold, controlled tone she now recognized as Adrian's authentic voice, the predator emerging fully from behind his charming mask. "You think you're being clever, but you've just declared war on someone who's destroyed stronger women than you. This was a mistake, Callista. A very expensive mistake that you're going to regret for the rest of your life." She forwarded every message to Catherine Walsh and Detective Chen, adding them to the growing file of evidence that would be used to prosecute him. That evening, she returned to their penthouse for what she intended to be the final time. Adrian was waiting in their living room, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his charming facade completely abandoned for the first time in their 3-year relationship. "You manipulative, scheming bitch," he snarled as she entered, his handsome face twisted into something ugly and barely controlled. 3 years I invested in this relationship. 3 years I gave you the best of myself, and this is how you repay my devotion? 3 years you spent systematically documenting my assets and planning my destruction," she corrected with calm precision, setting down her purse with deliberate composure. "I know about Margaret, Jennifer, and Rebecca. I know about the secret photographs, the financial manipulation, the systematic psychological abuse. I know everything, Adrian. Every last detail of your pathetic little pattern." His face went pale, then flushed with rage as he realized the full scope of her knowledge. "You hired investigators. You violated my privacy, my personal files, my confidential business." The irony was breathtaking. The man who'd secretly photographed her for months, who'd accessed her private emails and bank records, who'd planned her emotional and financial destruction, was outraged about invasion of his privacy. "I protected myself from a predator," she replied simply. "Something I should have done the moment I met you, but I made the mistake of believing you were actually human." Adrian stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists, and for a moment she wondered if he might escalate to physical violence. But he was too calculating for that, too aware that assault charges would complicate his legal situation even further. "You're going to regret this decision," he said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that was all the more sinister for its controlled delivery. "I'll destroy your reputation in this city, your business relationships, your professional standing. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of cold, calculating woman you really are underneath all that professional success." "What kind of woman am I, Adrian?" she asked, genuinely curious about how his twisted psychology would characterize her. "You're exactly what I thought you were from the beginning. A heartless, money-obsessed workaholic who seduces successful men and then tries to steal everything they've built when you get bored. You care more about your career than human relationships, and you'll destroy anyone who gets in your way." The projection was stunning in its completeness. He was literally describing his own behavior while attributing it to her, probably believing his own psychological reframing of reality. "You're absolutely right about one thing," Callista said, moving toward the door with the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. "I am calculating, and I calculated exactly how to stop you from destroying another woman the way you destroyed Margaret, Jennifer, and Rebecca." "Those women were weak," Adrian spat, his mask slipping completely to reveal the contempt he felt for all his victims. "They deserved what happened to them because they were too stupid to see what was happening. But you're different. You think you're smarter than me, but you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone tries to humiliate me." "No, Adrian," she said, pausing at the threshold to deliver her final words to the man who'd tried to destroy her life. "You're going to discover what happens when a predator targets someone who's actually superior to him in every way that matters. You're going to pay for what you did to me and to those other women, in criminal court, in civil court, and in every newspaper in this city when your story goes public." She walked out of the penthouse and never looked back, leaving behind 3 years of lies and stepping into a future built entirely on her own terms. If you're rooting for Callista like I am, show some love by hitting that like button. And if you want more stories of women taking back their power, subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started with these empowering tales. The next few weeks unfolded like the most successful campaign of her career, each element timing perfectly with the others to create maximum impact. Adrian's construction company faced federal investigation for fraud and tax evasion. His business partnerships dissolved under legal scrutiny, and his reputation in Manhattan's social and business circles crumbled as details of his predatory pattern became public knowledge. 3 of his former mistresses came forward with their own stories of manipulation and financial abuse, each one adding weight to the criminal case being built against him. Rebecca, his previous wife, filed new motions to regain custody of her children, armed with Catherine Walsh's evidence of Adrian's systematic psychological manipulation and documented history of destroying families. But most satisfying of all was the call Callista received from Detective Chen 3 weeks after filing for divorce. "Margaret and Jennifer want to meet with you," Chen informed her. "They're filing a class action lawsuit against Adrian for the financial and emotional damages he inflicted over the years, and they want to coordinate with your case to ensure he faces the maximum possible consequences." The meeting took place in Catherine Walsh's conference room on a Tuesday afternoon, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows as 3 women who'd never met before sat together, united by their shared experience of surviving the same predator. "He told us we were crazy," Margaret said, her voice still carrying traces of the trauma Adrian had inflicted years earlier. "He made us believe we were imagining the manipulation, that we were too emotional and unstable to see things clearly, that our own perceptions couldn't be trusted. He's a master at psychological gaslighting," Jennifer added, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "But seeing all this evidence, having it documented and verified, it validates everything we experienced and thought we might have imagined." As the 3 women shared their stories, Callista realized that Adrian's methods had been remarkably consistent across all his relationships. The same pattern of charm, followed by isolation, followed by systematic manipulation and financial control, followed by carefully orchestrated abandonment designed to leave his victims devastated and unable to recover. "What gave you the strength to fight back?" Rebecca asked during their second meeting the following week. Callista thought carefully before answering. "I think it was realizing that my professional skills, reading people, understanding psychology, strategic planning, were exactly what I needed to beat him at his own game. He chose the wrong target because he assumed successful women would be just as vulnerable as anyone else to his particular brand of manipulation." Within 8 weeks, Adrian's carefully constructed empire collapsed completely and permanently. His construction company filed for bankruptcy. His personal assets were liquidated to pay legal settlements, and he faced multiple criminal charges for fraud, theft, and psychological abuse. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, with prosecutors confident of securing significant prison time. Callista, meanwhile, discovered something powerful about herself that the trauma had initially hidden. The experience hadn't broken her spirit, it had revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. Her work at Sterling and Associates became even sharper and more intuitive, her creative vision more compelling, her client relationships deeper and more trusting. She'd learned to trust her instincts completely, never again doubting her ability to read people and situations with laser-like accuracy. More importantly, she'd learned that surviving betrayal didn't require forgiveness, reconciliation, or moving on in the traditional sense. Sometimes the healthiest response to systematic abuse was strategic, overwhelming retaliation designed to prevent future victims. 1 year later, Callista stood in her new corner office overlooking Madison Avenue from a different angle, but with an entirely transformed perspective on everything that mattered in life. The morning sun streamed through windows she'd chosen herself, illuminating awards and client testimonials that belonged exclusively to her achievements, in a space that represented the life she'd built entirely on her own terms. The transition from Sterling and Associates to founding Moreau Creative had been seamless and immediately successful. 7 major clients had followed her when she announced her independence, intrigued by her reputation for strategic brilliance, uncompromising integrity, and the kind of psychological insight that only comes from surviving and defeating a master manipulator. Her first major campaign as an independent agency owner, a comprehensive empowerment series for Manhattan Women's Financial Services, had won 4 industry awards and attracted national media attention. The campaign's tagline, "Never Again," had resonated so powerfully with audiences that other companies were requesting similar work focused on helping women recognize and escape various forms of manipulation and abuse. But the real victory was internal and permanent. The woman looking back at her from the polished surface of her mahogany desk was someone she recognized completely. Strong, intuitive, unafraid of her own power, and utterly unwilling to compromise her autonomy for any relationship that wasn't built on genuine mutual respect and shared values. Her assistant knocked softly at the glass door. "Ms. Moreau, Detective Chen is here for your lunch meeting." Sarah Chen had evolved from professional contact to trusted friend to business partner in an unexpected development that perfectly illustrated how surviving betrayal could lead to opportunities that surpassed anything from the previous life. Chen had left police work to start a private investigation firm specializing in exposing marriage fraud, and Moreau Creative had become their exclusive marketing and public relations partner. "How are you adjusting to being completely free?" Chen asked, as they settled into their usual corner booth at a nearby cafe that had become their regular meeting spot. "Free is exactly the right word," Callista replied, stirring honey into her tea with the relaxed movements of someone who no longer lived in a constant state of hypervigilance. "I never realized how much mental and emotional energy I was spending trying to fix something that was deliberately designed to break me down." The legal proceedings had concluded 6 months earlier with results that exceeded even Catherine Walsh's optimistic predictions. Adrian had pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy, receiving a 7-year prison sentence that would keep him away from potential victims until he was well into his 50s. His assets had been completely liquidated to compensate his victims, and comprehensive restraining orders protected all 4 women from any future contact. "Have you heard from any of the other wives lately?" Chen asked, reviewing notes for a new case with similar patterns. Callista smiled with genuine warmth. "Margaret's bakery is thriving again. She used the settlement money to open a larger location in Soho and now employs 12 people. Jennifer's non-profit has helped over 200 women recognize financial abuse and escape dangerous relationships. And Rebecca not only regained full custody of her children, but she's remarried to someone who actually deserves her. And the 4 of you remain in contact. We meet quarterly for dinner, actually. It started as support group meetings, but it's evolved into genuine friendship. We call ourselves the Phoenix Club, women who rose from ashes stronger than before." That afternoon, Callista returned to her office to find a surprise waiting, an enormous arrangement of white peonies with a card from her newest client, a tech startup founded by three brilliant women who'd heard her story through industry connections and wanted to work with someone who understood the value of female independence and strategic thinking. As she arranged the flowers on her desk, her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Walsh. Adrian's parole hearing scheduled for 6 years from now. All victims will be notified if he applies for early release, and your testimony will be crucial if he attempts to minimize his crimes. 6 years. By then, Callista would be 41, probably running a multi-million-dollar agency with offices in multiple cities, possibly married to someone who actually understood and respected her strength, definitely surrounded by the life she was building according to her own vision, rather than anyone else's expectations or manipulations. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Successful but unconsciously compromising herself for the sake of a relationship. Strong but not fully aware of her own worth. Intelligent but not yet wise enough to trust her own perceptions completely over someone else's carefully crafted lies. That woman felt like a different person entirely, someone she could remember with compassion but would never allow herself to become again. The late afternoon sun slanted across her office as she reviewed proposals for 3 new campaigns, each representing clients who trusted her vision, her expertise, her judgment. The same judgment Adrian had tried systematically to undermine was now the foundation of a business that generated more revenue in 6 months than many agencies produced in years. Her phone rang with a call from a potential new client, the CEO of a company that was rebuilding after a corporate scandal involving executive abuse of female employees. They needed someone who understood how to help people recognize manipulation and protect themselves from predatory behavior in professional settings. "Moreau Creative, this is Callista," she answered, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned exactly what she was capable of when properly motivated. "Ms. Moreau, we need someone who knows how to help people identify red flags and defend themselves against psychological manipulation. We've heard about your work and your personal experience. Would you be available to discuss a comprehensive campaign addressing workplace abuse?" She looked out her window at Manhattan spread below, filled with millions of people navigating relationships, making choices, learning to distinguish between genuine connection and carefully crafted deception designed to exploit their vulnerabilities. "Yes," she said simply, because she'd discovered her true calling. "I'm exactly the person you need." That evening, as autumn darkness settled over the city, Callista walked home to her new apartment, a space she'd chosen and furnished entirely according to her own preferences, with no input from anyone whose opinion she didn't actively seek and value. The apartment was smaller than the penthouse she'd shared with Adrian, but every element reflected her authentic taste rather than compromises made for the sake of a relationship built on lies. She poured herself a glass of wine from a bottle she'd selected in a kitchen she'd designed, wearing clothes she'd chosen because they made her feel powerful rather than appealing to someone else's preferences. The silence was complete and peaceful, broken only by the distant sounds of the city beyond her windows. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Phoenix Club dinner next Tuesday? I want to show you photos from Jennifer's wedding." Callista smiled, remembering how isolated and manipulated all 4 women had been when Adrian was controlling their lives. Now they celebrated each other's victories, supported each other through challenges, and had created the kind of genuine sisterhood that predators work so hard to prevent their victims from maintaining. She typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. I have news about the new expansion too." Because the greatest revenge against someone who tried to steal her power wasn't just surviving his attacks, it was becoming more successful, more influential, and more genuinely connected to people who mattered than she'd ever imagined possible. Callista Moreau had learned the most important lesson any woman could master. The person who emerges from systematic betrayal stronger, smarter, and more strategic than before is absolutely unstoppable. She never looked back. She never forgave. She never forgot. But most importantly, she never again allowed anyone to make her doubt her own worth, question her own perceptions, or compromise her own power for the sake of a relationship that required her to be less than completely herself. And in that absolute certainty about her own value and capabilities, she'd found a freedom more valuable than any marriage, more lasting than any romance, and more powerful than any person who might try to diminish her. The woman, reflecting back at her from her apartment windows, successful, autonomous, surrounded by genuine relationships and meaningful work, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd not only survived, but had transformed her pain into purpose and her betrayal into unshakable strength. Victory, she realized, looked exactly like the life she was living now.